Whenever you're ready, Senator.
Great. Thank you guys for joining. We're in the middle of we're at the start of a long day of the reconciliation process to cast votes for the Republican proposal to stuff even more money into ICE and CBP. And I want to talk about that and then a couple of other items. ICE and CBP are funded through a normal appropriations process. Last year, the Republican reconciliation bill, on top of that normal appropriation, decided that ICE and CBP needed $140 billion more on top of what they already were receiving via appropriations. And they put that into the reconciliation bill that I voted against, largely because of that bill's cuts, dramatic cuts to Medicaid and the food stamp program. Nevertheless, the bill passed on a partisan basis, and ICE and CBP received an additional $140 billion. We've done appropriations bills for fiscal year 2026 in every component except ICE and CBP. And what we said to our Republican colleagues is you just gave them $140 billion, and guess what? $100 billion of it hasn't been spent. So they're not running out of money. They're not unable to pay their employees. And before we agree to more appropriations for these agencies, we want to make sure that there are reforms so that we don't see the arrest and mistreatment of U.S. citizens. We don't see the murder of U.S. citizens, as was the sad case in Minneapolis with both Alex Preddy and Renee Good. We don't see some of the abuses we've seen all around the country. We've seen some of these abuses in Virginia. In 2025, there was an ICE operation in the Albemarle courthouse where ICE agents who were masked without identification and dressed in plainclothes were in the courthouse trying to seize people. And, courthouses can be challenging places. You've got witnesses, you've got jurors, you've got litigants, often on highly emotional matters, domestic violence, family law, criminal cases. And when agents come in and they're masked and they're in plain clothes and they won't identify themselves and they start trying to grab people, you run the real risk of there being some significant public safety challenges in courthouses. And so we wanted to do basic reforms of ICE and CBP before we agreed to stuff even more money in them. The Republican majority here, at the direction of President Trump, basically said, we don't want to do reforms of these agencies. So let's just use a partisan reconciliation process to give them even more money with no reforms. So get this, that's what we're doing today. We're voting on a bill that Republicans at President Trump's direction have advanced to give ICE and CBP another $70 billion. Now remember, we gave them $140 billion in the reconciliation bill last year, of which $100 billion has not been spent. They don't need any more money. But the Trump administration is just bound and determined we're going to force this additional money into an agency that has $100 billion sitting in the bank. The Trump administration also was trying to get money to build a ballroom for the president, a ballroom that he said was going to be paid by private donations. And at least as of today, it looks like they've dropped that inclusion into the bill. It doesn't mean they won't bring it back. And we found out last week that the Trump administration was also attempting to cobble together a slush fund of $1.7 billion to hand out to their political friends, particularly and most egregiously those who had invaded the Capitol on January 6, 2021, encouraged by Donald Trump to help overturn the election of Joe Biden as president. Now, they have since announced that they're not going to ask for that money, but their commitment to that has been pretty equivocal. And so we're not sure whether they're really dropping it or they're just trying to reduce public scrutiny of it and find another way to make it happen. Needless to say, we're going to vote on a series of amendments today during the vote-a-rama. The first amendment that's up is to clarify that no money can be used for the slush fund. The second amendment we'll have, that should start soon, amendment vote, is no money for the ballroom unless Congress specifically authorizes it. And we'll have other amendments during the day. I have an amendment I'm trying to get called up for a vote dealing with ICE reforms, a pretty simple one, that ICE and CBP shouldn't be conducting operations in local jurisdictions without giving notice to local law enforcement and deconflicting any of their activities with local law enforcement activities. This is not a bill that would require local permission, but at a minimum, using the Albemarle situation, it would require notice and deconfliction so that there's not confusion about masked, unidentified ICE agents going into public places and trying to seize people without warrants. We'll have these amendments throughout the day, and I'll probably be doing some social media as various amendments come up for a vote. The second thing I want to mention is a very historic week. Before the Memorial Day recess, the Senate acted to rebuff Donald Trump's illegal and unwise war in Iran by a majority vote, embracing my war powers resolution saying no war in Iran without vote of Congress. Now, my actual resolution has yet to be voted on the merits, but on the first vote, a procedural vote, I was able to get 4 Republicans to join Democrats to say we need to take this bill out of the basically being hidden in the Foreign Relations Committee and put it on the floor for the whole Senate to debate. And so that was the first positive vote on a war powers resolution against Iran. That happened the week before Memorial Day recess. This week, the House acted, and they acted similarly, with Republicans crossing over to support Democrats saying we shouldn't be at war in Iran without a vote of Congress. So you've now had both houses rebuff the idea of this president being able to take us to war whenever, wherever, against whomever he wants without coming to Congress. This is a big deal that both houses have now rebuffed this illegal, unwise, and very unpopular war. And we're grappling in the Senate, once we get through reconciliation, likely next week, do we move forward on the Senate bill? Do we try to take up the House bill? We don't have any illusion that President Trump cares what Congress thinks. If he did, he would have come to us as the Constitution required before starting this unnecessary war. But when these votes start to pass and the president starts to lose support, even among members of the Republican caucus in the 2 houses, it starts to additionally demonstrate how unpopular this war is. The president can see it in polling. The president can see it in how outraged Americans are about the price of gas that they're paying because of actions of this president. And now the president is watching as Republicans slowly move over into a camp saying, hey, let's bring this to a close. We need an off-ramp. We shouldn't be in this illegal and unwise war. And so stay tuned. We're likely to have more Senate action on this likely next week. The last thing I'll say is I've got a bill that I'm about to introduce with Representative Hayes of Connecticut that's called, it's Better Education Through Mentoring Act. And it is to promote mentorship programs as a way of meeting the shortage of classroom teachers. There are some strong mentorship programs that I've seen around Virginia where during a new teacher's first few years, they get assigned a mentor of a senior teacher in that division, and that mentor helps the new teacher become effective more promptly. But also the mentorship program ends up helping new teachers develop teaching styles and a comfort with the profession that is more likely to lead them to stay in teaching. So it's both an educational effectiveness program, but also a teacher retention program. And so in this particular bill, which we've modeled after some of the programs we've seen jurisdictions in Virginia effectively implement, we're proposing providing funding for jurisdictions that have these mentorship programs, because to take a little bit of a time away from a classroom teacher from being in the class to actually mentor other teachers, there is a cost to that. And so that's what we're trying to do. And we think it's one solution, not the only solution, but one solution that will lead to filling up the ranks of classroom teachers. We have shortages virtually everywhere in the country, and also a bubble that's a retirement bubble that's likely to hit in the next few years that will make those shortages even more acute. With that, I'm glad to open it up and take your questions.
First up, we have Michael from WHSV.
Hey, Michael.
And thank you for taking the time. My question to you is, what are, is my audio picking up? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. You're just making a face. What are your thoughts going into pushing a war powers resolution in the Senate again, knowing that the House finally pushed something through. It's been something that they've constantly denying. They closed down for session before the last vote, right before the last votes. What are your outlooks for the Senate passing a similar measure?
Yeah, so we did pass one 2 weeks ago. And what's happened in the Senate is, I basically insisted that we will be voting on these virtually every week. I mean, from the very first week, I said this war is illegal. It's unnecessary. We shouldn't be in it. It never would have been necessary if Donald Trump hadn't destroyed a diplomatic deal with Iran that was working during his first term. And you shouldn't destroy a diplomatic deal and say, oh, well, now we have to send US troops to risk and even lose their lives, spend billions of dollars, punish the American families with higher gas prices because I was foolish enough to get out of a diplomatic deal and now we got to go to war. 25 years of war in the Middle East should have taught us something, namely that we don't need more US involvement in wars in the Middle East. So in the Senate, at first, when I filed, I got one Republican vote. A few weeks later, we got two Republicans vote. A few weeks later, we got three Republican votes. The last time we called this up about 2 weeks back, we got four Republican votes. If there's 100% attendance in the Senate, and sometimes during a week somebody's gone for one reason or another, if there's 100% attendance, we need 5 Republican votes to get this, over the goal line. And so that's my effort right now. I have 4 Republican votes, and I'm looking for a 5th, but in a historic way. Since the beginning of the War Powers Act passing in 1974, I'm not aware of both houses now acting to rebuke and rebuff a president's unilateral war. So this is a way, and the same thing happened in the House. They had, one Republican vote and then a couple. They got 4 Republican votes yesterday. There's increasing unease among the majority in both houses with this illegal and unwise war.
All right, next we have Chris Horn.
Hey,
Chris.
Senator, thanks for taking time today.
You bet.
My original question was, do you think this is an inflection point, the House vote yesterday, following the Senate vote a couple of weeks ago before the Memorial Day break? And you've kind of touched on it several times already, but larger picture, do you think Congress is willing to accept an end to the war without knowledge and possession of the enriched uranium?
That is obviously a question about the will of the entire body. I know my opinion, but let me tell you what Secretary Rubio testified to 2 days ago. He said, look, we are viewing this negotiation with Iran as a phased negotiation. And that is, phase 1 would involve a complete ceasefire, a reopening the Straits of Hormuz, and then also an end to the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports. Those would be the first steps. If those 3 things happen, then we move into a second phase where we have a discussion about the nuclear program, the enriched uranium. Remember, when Donald Trump tore up the diplomatic deal, Iran had 0 enriched uranium. It was only after the president tore up the deal that Iran resumed enrichment activities. But that second phase of the negotiation, that would certainly be something I would support. I would support a phase 1 that's ceasefire, reopen the straits, in the blockade, and then to have the longer discussion about the other items. I would support that. I think extending the ceasefire is the right thing to do. That means less U.S. troops at risk. That means less instability in the region, less civilians killed, less attacks on our allies, and more opportunity to find the ultimate off-ramp we need. So the basic concept that the Secretary of State put on the table the other day would be a concept that I would welcome.
Next, we have Coulter from WTKR.
Hey, Coulter.
Hey, Senator, another question about the War Powers resolution. We've got sounds like competing legislation. The Senate has passed legislation. The House has passed legislation. Would you rather see the Senate take a vote on the Senate's legislation, or would you rather see the Senate take up the House's legislation? And I guess, when could we potentially see a vote being taken in the Senate?
I think you'll see the vote next week, and we're trying to decide what's the best option. I I don't have pride of authorship. The Senate resolution is mine. I'm the chief sponsor of it. But whatever gets to the result fastest so that we can find an off-ramp out of this illegal and unwise war, I'm supportive of. So we're sort of analyzing the two routes, pulling up the House bill versus doing the motion to proceed on my bill. And then we're kind of gaming out the timing of votes to determine what might get us to endgame the fastest. And we don't have an answer for that. I told my staff this morning, I'm going to be completely focused on this reconciliation bill today. As soon as it's done, have a recommendation for me about which bill we should try to call up first.
Next, we have Emma from the Virginian Pilot.
Hey, Emma.
Hey, Senator. Yeah, so now that the Ford's back, we've been hearing more from families about the impact of the deployment on them. And I'm curious what the conversations across the aisle are looking like on the Iran war at this point. And I'm curious what's changing from your perspective. And also if other folks are hearing from their constituents who are being sent to fight this war, what they're kind of making of the impacts this deployment has had so far.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a lot from Ford families and from Hampton Roads about this. And I know my colleagues are too. And, you know, I just sort of know what the calls are that come into the front desk every day. I know what my staff who work in Hampton Roads, I know what they're hearing. I know what the popularity of this war is. It's very low among the American public and Virginians. I think what's changing that is getting more and more Republicans to join our effort to stop the war is the consequences are mounting. You know, when the war started, I think some Republicans had questions, but they thought, well, let's trust the president and maybe it'll be over soon. Well, okay, now we're March, April, May, we're 3.5 months into this war, or 3+ months into the war. It's not over soon. The estimates are, get this, that the cost of the war to the Defense Department is probably now in the $40 billion range. The cost of the war to the American public, just in excess gas costs, from what they were on February 27 to what they are now, is probably now in excess of $45 billion. The estimate is the American public will likely pay $200 billion more in gas because of the war, if you measure it through the end of this calendar year. And every day the war goes on, you see gas prices are really hurting people. The closure of commerce through the Straits of Hormuz also affect fertilizer costs, which affects farmers. It affects other goods that are transiting. And that's one of the reasons why the inflation rate is rising. President Trump, you know, the long-time strategy with Iran is use sanctions and other tools to punish their economy so that they might then come to the table to negotiate and find a path out of some of their bad action. What President Trump is doing is punishing the American economy and the entire world's economy, including Iran's, by the war that he's waged. And so we have allies all over the globe who are suffering because the president got into a war that's affecting them without consulting with them. So every day the war goes on, Americans pay more and the popularity of the war decreases. And my colleagues are hearing that, and that's the reason why more and more and more are coming over to say it's time to stop this.
Next, we have
Can I
Oh.
ask just a quick, I'm so sorry,
Yeah.
ask one quick follow-up. Yeah, so on that note too, you know, we have the USS Iwo Jima coming home on Saturday from the Caribbean, and I was wondering if the Operation Southern Spear, and you know, they just sent out more Marines for that mission. Is that something that's also on Congress's radar? What's sort
Yes.
of the conversation being had about that?
Yeah, I think the main issue with Southern Spear, I mean, there's some financial issues. What happens, this is how kind of military budgeting happens. When in the middle of the year you embark upon a new operation, the money for it tends to come out of the Army's budget because they have the biggest budget. And then they say, hey, look, you gotta compensate us for this. It's not purely an Army operation. A lot of, like all of the National Guard deployments to US cities like DC, been coming out of the Army's budget. Southern Spear coming out of the Army's budget, even though it's not really an Army exercise. And so we're working on the defense bill. Next week is the week in the Senate Armed Services Committee where we write the defense bill. So there is a whole set of discussions around the financial consequences to the DoD of all these wars at the same time. But on Southern Spear, there's also a very significant question about the legality of it that I've raised from the very beginning. Now, I'm at some disadvantage in talking to you because the administration has tried to shield as much as they can about Southern Spear in classified, thus putting a gag rule on the ability of members of Congress to talk about it. So, for example, I know the secret list of designated terrorist organizations against whom the president has authorized the use of U.S. military force, but I'm not allowed to talk about it. And actually, the groups on that list, they're not aware they're on the list. Normally, an enemy is made aware the U.S. has declared us an enemy, and then that means people don't join the enemy. They don't join up with ISIS if the U.S. has declared opposition to ISIS. But thus far, the list of the DTOs that the president has designated is secret. I can't describe it. I know the targeting criteria that the U.S. is using to decide which boats to strike in the Caribbean and the Pacific, but I'm now not allowed to describe those criteria because they've only been shared with me in a classified setting. But I did share at a hearing with Secretary Rubio 2 days ago, both Rand Paul of Kentucky and I shared this, that while we can't discuss the targeting criteria, we can share things that aren't on the targeting criteria. So get this, dozens of strikes against boats in the Caribbean and Pacific, killing over 200 people, and there is no requirement that the U.S. military find evidence of any narcotics on board the boats for them to be stricken. There's no requirement that the U.S. military find any presence of arms on the boat in order for them to be stricken. So they're operating under a set of orders allowing the destruction of boats with no narcotics and no arms and the killing of those on board. Many of us have deep concern about whether attacks of that kind could ever be lawful. And so in the Armed Services Committee meeting next week, markup next week, and in other things that we're doing, we're trying to continue to raise this legality issue as well as the use of military assets and whether it's wise.
Next, we have Dakota from WVIR.
Hey, Dakota.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for speaking with us today. My question is, what is your response to President Trump's claim saying that Republicans who do support are grandstanders?
You know, let me talk about the Republicans in the Senate. Susan Collins is the chief appropriator on the Appropriations Committee. It's one of the most powerful positions in the Senate, and she's the opposite of a grandstander. She's not going around, putting out press releases. She supported the president. She said the War Powers Resolution allows the president to maintain military actions for 60 days without coming to Congress. As soon as we got to 60 days, she said, the law is clear, you got to come to Congress. What's grandstanding about that? Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, she also supported the president through the first 60 days and then said, okay, it's after 60 days, you got to come to Congress. Similarly, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, he gave the president 60 days. After 60 days, you got to come to Congress. The one who was with me from the very beginning, Rand Paul of Kentucky, all the way to the time I started in the Senate, Rand Paul has believed, like I do, that no president, Democrat or Republican, can take the nation to war without coming to Congress. I have held the same principle to presidents, whether it's President Obama, President Trump term 1, President Biden, or President Trump term 2. It's not a grandstanding position. It's my read of the Constitution. Rand Paul says the same thing. The president is nervous that he's losing more and more and more Republican votes. And again, I don't think he really cares about Congress, but what he is learning from this is the reason that Republicans are now voting against the war is because it's so deeply unpopular with the American public. And they put the war solely on Donald Trump's shoulders. He launched it without a clear plan, without a clear rationale, without consulting with Congress, without consulting with allies. And so increases in gas costs, increases in other basic commodities are purely because of this decision that he made that is in the context of we had a working diplomatic deal that he tore up. And many of us told him at the time, if you tear up this diplomatic deal, then we'll end up being in a war and our troops would be killed. So maintain the deal. He didn't listen to us. And now, sadly, what we predicted would happen is happening.
Next, we have
Thank you.
Mitchell from WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for
Hey there.
joining us.
You bet.
Related to the issues you just touched on, I wanted to link that to what's going on right now with the Vote-A-Rama. Unfortunately, this first vote has been open for more than 2 hours.
It's strange.
Not a good foreshadowing there, but
No.
at any rate, what is your sense of how serious getting rid of this anti-weaponization fund is among Republicans, especially given the fact that the president reiterated yesterday he still thinks it's a good idea, and it seems like, as you just alluded to, things have become more complicated with Senators Cassidy, Senator Cornyn getting pushed out in their primaries.
The Republicans really don't like this. And so the question is, have we been given the appropriate level of assurances on the proposal? And I don't think the Todd Blanche assurances have been as ironclad as my colleagues would wish. So the first vote, I'm just looking up at the screen here. I'm in my hideaway. 96 votes have been cast, and it's 47 to 49, 47 in favor of the Schumer amendment that would basically try to make ironclad the guarantee of no slush fund. 49 Republicans are voting against the Schumer motion. There's still 4 votes outstanding. I don't know who they are. This is obviously a very, very controversial issue. And however it gets resolved in connection with the reconciliation bill, this isn't going away for Democrats, at least. We're not, we have every reason to believe that the Trump administration will try to, if it's not in this bill, or if we, try to shut it down in this bill, they'll try to find an end run to do it anyway. And we're going to stay on top of it and make sure they can't.
Those were everyone's questions. Thank you,
Right.
everyone, for joining, and we'll
Thanks,
follow up
guys.
shortly with a video link.